What if the one person who could save you from your past was the last person you'd ever expect to see again? Vincent Moretti sat alone at the corner table of Rosa's Italian bistro, straightening his tie for the third time. At 72 years old, he hadn't been this nervous in decades, not since his days running the docks, making decisions that kept his family fed, but cost him pieces of his soul. Those days were behind him now, 20 years behind him. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Dinner with Margaret, the kind widow from his book club who made him laugh and didn't ask about his past. But when the restaurant door opened, it wasn't Margaret who walked in. It was a woman Vincent hadn't seen in 45 years. Her silver hair was pulled back, her face lined with time. But those eyes, he'd know those eyes anywhere. Elena. She walked straight to his table, her expression urgent, almost frightened. "Vincent," she said, her voice trembling, "you can't meet her tonight. That woman you're waiting for, she's not who you think she is." Vincent's heart hammered in his chest as Elena stood before him, her hands clutching a worn leather purse. The restaurant's warm lighting cast shadows across her face, and he could see the weight of years in the way she held herself. Still elegant, but weathered by time and whatever had brought her here. "Elena," he finally managed, his voice rough. What are you doing here?" She glanced over her shoulder at the door, then back at him. "I didn't want to come. God knows I didn't. But I couldn't let this happen without warning you." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, uninvited but determined. "That woman, Margaret, she's been asking questions about you all over town. Questions about your past, about your family, about—" She stopped, lowering her voice. "About what happened in 1982. Vincent felt the blood drain from his face. 1982. The year everything fell apart. The year his brother died, and Vincent had to make choices that haunted him still. He'd spent 2 decades building a quiet life in this small Connecticut town, far from the Brooklyn streets where he'd made his name. He volunteered at the library, attended church on Sundays, played chess with other retired men at the community center. Nobody here knew Vincent Moretti had once been someone people feared. "What does Margaret want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena reached across the table, her hand hovering near his but not quite touching. "I don't know exactly. But my daughter works at the county clerk's office. She saw Margaret requesting old property records, court documents, things from when you owned the warehouse on Atlantic Avenue." Elena's eyes searched his face. "Vincent, I think she's writing a book. Or working with someone who is. She's been photographing old newspaper clippings, talking to people who remember those days." The realization hit Vincent like a physical blow. He'd been careful, so careful, to leave that life behind. He'd served his time. 3 years for racketeering, another 2 on parole. He'd cooperated with authorities, testified when it mattered, tried to make amends where he could. But the past never really stayed buried, did it? He thought of his granddaughter, Sophie, who was graduating from nursing school next month. She knew her grandfather had made mistakes when he was younger, but she didn't know the details. She didn't need to. She loved him for who he was now. The man who'd raised her after her father, Vincent's son, died of cancer 10 years ago. The man who drove her to classes, helped her study, cheered louder than anyone at her achievements. "Why are you helping me?" Vincent asked Elena. "After everything?" They'd been engaged once, a lifetime ago. He'd broken her heart when he chose his brother's business over their future together. She'd married someone else, had children, built a good life. They'd seen each other maybe twice in 45 years, always from a distance, always with the weight of what might have been hanging between them. Elena smiled sadly. "Because I know you changed. I've watched you from afar, Vincent. I've seen how you are with your granddaughter, how you volunteer, how you're trying to make up for the past. You don't deserve to have everything destroyed now. Not when you've worked so hard to be better." She pulled a small envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. "Margaret's staying at the Riverside Inn, room 204. There are notes in here, things my daughter copied when she saw what Margaret was researching. You need to decide what to do." Vincent picked up the envelope with shaking hands. Before he could open it, his phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "Running 15 minutes late. So sorry. Can't wait to see you." The heart emoji felt like a knife. Had any of it been real? The conversations about their favorite books, the way she'd touched his arm when she laughed, the gentle kiss they'd shared after last week's reading group. Or had it all been calculation, a way to get close to a man whose past might make good material for someone's true crime project? What should I do? He asked Elena, and it felt like being 25 again, asking her advice before he'd learned to trust only himself and live with the consequences. Talk to her, Elena said. Before you meet her tonight, go to her hotel. Confront her honestly. See if I'm wrong. Maybe I am. Maybe she genuinely cares about you and this is all coincidence. But neither of them believed that, and they both knew it. Vincent sat in his car outside the Riverside Inn for 20 minutes, Elena's envelope unopened on the passenger seat. The autumn rain had started, soft drops pattering against the windshield, and he watched the water blur the hotel's lights into abstract shapes. He'd faced down threats before, men with guns, federal agents, his own guilty conscience. But somehow this felt harder. Because Margaret had made him hope. Hope that at 72, with everything he'd done and been, he might still deserve someone's honest affection. Finally, he opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies of request forms from the county clerk's office, all in Margaret's handwriting. Property records for the Atlantic Avenue warehouse, court transcripts from his trial, newspaper articles about his brother Tommy's death. The official story was a heart attack, but the streets knew different. And there, at the bottom, a business card. Margaret Stenson, investigative writer, Blackwood Publishing. Vincent closed his eyes. He'd been such a fool. He got out of the car and walked into the hotel, rain soaking through his jacket. The young man at the desk called up to room 204, and a moment later, Margaret's voice came through the phone, bright and welcoming. Vincent? Is that you? Come on up. I'm almost ready. When she opened the door, she was beautiful. Her gray hair was styled perfectly. She wore the blue dress he'd once mentioned he liked, and her smile was warm and genuine-looking. For a second, he almost doubted Elena's information. Then he saw the laptop on the desk, papers spread around it, and one document face up. A chapter outline titled, The Last Good Fella, Vincent Moretti's Road to Redemption. Margaret, he said quietly. She followed his gaze to the desk, and he watched her face change. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated. Determination mixed with resignation. I guess we should talk, she said, stepping back to let him in. They sat across from each other at the small hotel room table, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Margaret poured them both water from the pitcher on the desk. How did you find out? She asked. Does it matter? Vincent's voice was steady, but inside he felt like he was crumbling. Was any of it real? The book club, the conversations, he couldn't finish. Margaret looked down at her hands. Yes, she said softly. God help me, yes. That's what makes this so complicated. She took a breath. I was hired 6 months ago to write about former organized crime figures who've genuinely reformed. It's supposed to be a book about redemption, about whether people can really change. When I started researching, your name came up. Your story, leaving the life, testifying, rebuilding. It was compelling. So I moved here, joined your book club, planned to observe you and eventually interview you. But, Vincent prompted. But I didn't expect to actually like you, Margaret said, and there were tears in her eyes now. I didn't expect you to be funny and kind and so obviously devoted to your granddaughter. I didn't expect to feel something real when we talked about Steinbeck, and when you told me about your wife who passed away. I didn't expect to fall for a man I was supposed to be writing about. Vincent wanted to believe her. Every part of him wanted to. Then why didn't you tell me the truth? Because I'm a coward, she said simply. And because... She gestured at the papers. Because I already took a substantial advance for this book. Because my daughter needs help with medical bills, and this project is how I'm paying them. Because I thought maybe I could write something that honored who you've become instead of just rehashing who you were. The room felt very small. Vincent stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked parking lot. My granddaughter graduates next month, he said. She's 24 years old, and she's worked so hard to become a nurse. She's good and honest and everything I wasn't at her age. He turned to face Margaret. If this book comes out, people will harass her. They'll ask questions, dig into our family, turn her grandfather into some kind of curiosity or villain. I can't let that happen. Margaret wiped her eyes. I know. I've been wrestling with that for weeks. Every time I sat with you. Every time Sophie's name came up and I saw how much you love her. I thought about stopping the project. But then I'd remember my own daughter, Emma, and her hospital bills. And I'd convince myself I could write it sensitively, that I could focus on the redemption angle, that... She stopped. I've been lying to myself as much as to you. The silence that followed was heavy with all the things that might have been. If they'd met in a different way, under different circumstances, maybe something real could have grown. But this foundation was built on deception, no matter how complicated the feelings had become. What happens now? Margaret asked. Vincent thought of Elena, sitting in that restaurant, warning him even after all these years. He thought of Sophie, studying for her final exams. He thought of all the people he'd hurt in his younger years, and all the years he'd spent trying to make amends. I don't know, he admitted, but I need to think. And I need you to promise me, no book. Not about me. Not now. Please. If this moment touched your heart, if you've ever struggled with the choice between doing what's easy and doing what's right, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps us share more stories like this. Margaret nodded slowly. I promise, for what it's worth, I really am sorry. Vincent left without another word, the weight of disappointment heavy in his chest. Vincent drove through the rain, not heading home but not knowing where else to go. He ended up at Sacred Heart Cemetery, where his wife Maria was buried. He hadn't been here in a couple of months. Sophie always said he didn't need to visit a grave to remember someone he'd loved. But tonight he needed the quiet, the permission to talk aloud to someone who'd known him at his worst and loved him anyway. He sat on the bench near her headstone, rain dripping from the trees above. I messed up again, Maria, he said to the granite marker. Thought I was smarter than this. Thought I'd learn to see people clearly. But I let myself hope, and look where it got me. Maria had known about his past when they married. She'd been a waitress at his brother's restaurant, and she'd seen the men who came and went, understood what kind of business was really being conducted. She'd given him an ultimatum 5 years into their marriage: change or lose her and their son. It had taken him another 3 years to fully walk away, but he'd done it. For her. And when he'd gone to prison, she'd waited. When he'd come out, broken and ashamed, she'd helped him rebuild. She'd been the one who suggested the book club, the volunteering, the small acts of kindness that slowly stitched his soul back together. His phone rang. Sophie. He almost didn't answer, didn't want her to hear the defeat in his voice, but she'd worry if he didn't. Grandpa, where are you? I brought dinner by your place and you're not here. Her voice was bright, full of the energy she always had after a good clinical shift. I'm just out, sweetheart. Be home soon. Are you okay? You sound weird. He could never hide anything from her. Just tired. Long day. Okay, well, I made that pasta thing Grandma used to make. I'll leave it in your fridge. Love you. Love you too, Sophie. After he hung up, Vincent sat with the silence. Sophie didn't know he'd been planning to introduce her to Margaret next week. He'd been thinking ahead, imagining holidays together, imagining not being alone anymore. The loneliness of the past 5 years since Maria died had been crushing sometimes, and Margaret had felt like a gift, a second chance at companionship in his final years. But it had all been research. Professional interest dressed up as personal connection, or had it. Margaret's tears had seemed real. Her conflict had seemed genuine. But how could he trust his judgment when it had already been so wrong? The next morning, Vincent forced himself through his routine. He made coffee, read the paper, drove to the library for his volunteer shift sorting returned books. Mrs. Patterson, the librarian, asked if he was feeling well. Apparently he looked peaked. He assured her he was fine, just didn't sleep well. At noon, Elena called. Did you talk to her? She asked without preamble. Yes. He told her everything. The research, the book, Margaret's confession, his own confusion about what had been real and what hadn't. Elena listened without interrupting. When he finished, She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Vincent, can I tell you something I've never told you before?" "Of course." "When you broke things off with me to work with your brother, I hated you. For years I hated you. I'd see you around the neighborhood, with Maria, eventually, and I'd think about how you chose crime over me, over the life we could have had." Her voice was steady but emotional. "But you know what changed? About 10 years ago, I heard about your son getting sick. I heard how you took care of him, how you cared for Sophie when he couldn't. And I realized you'd become the man I'd wanted you to be back then. You'd just needed a different path to get there." Vincent's throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because people change, Vincent. You did. And maybe Margaret is somewhere in her own journey, making mistakes but capable of growth. I'm not saying trust her. I don't know if you can. But I am saying don't let this poison the good work you've done on yourself. Don't let one person's deception make you forget that you've earned the life you have now." After they hung up, Vincent sat in his car in the library parking lot and cried. He cried for Maria, for the years he'd wasted, for the innocence Sophie would lose if his past became public, for the connection with Margaret that might have been real, but couldn't be trusted. And then, when the tears stopped, he called his lawyer. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between protecting yourself and giving someone a second chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your stories. Because Vincent was about to make a choice that would change everything. Vincent met with his lawyer, Frank Donovan, the next afternoon. Frank had handled Vincent's affairs since the early days of his cooperation with authorities, and they'd become something like friends over the decades. After Vincent explained the situation, Frank leaned back in his chair and studied him. "What do you want to happen here?" Frank asked. "You want me to send her a cease and desist? We can do that. Her publisher won't want legal trouble." "Could we stop the book entirely?" "Depends on what she's written, what sources she's used. If it's all public record, probably not. But we can make it difficult enough that she might abandon it, especially if she actually cares about you the way she claims." Vincent stared at the law books lining Frank's office walls. "There's something else," he said slowly. "What if we didn't stop it? What if we controlled it instead?" Frank raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "What if I actually talked to her, gave her the real story, not just the court records and newspaper articles, but the truth, the regrets, the changes, the work I've done to be better? If this is going to come out anyway, maybe it should come out right. Vincent, that's a risk. Opening up could expose things. There's nothing left to expose that the prosecutors don't already have," Vincent interrupted. "I told them everything 20 years ago. But what nobody knows is what came after. The thousands of small choices to be different. The nights I couldn't sleep because of guilt. The relationships I rebuilt. Maybe that story is worth telling. Maybe Sophie deserves to know that part of her grandfather too." Frank was quiet for a moment. "This is assuming Margaret is genuine about her feelings, that she won't use your vulnerability against you." "I know," Vincent said. "But Elena told me something yesterday. She said people change, and I had to believe in that possibility. If I don't believe people can change, then what was the point of everything I've done?" Frank smiled slightly. "You're a better man than me, Vincent Moretti." "No," Vincent said quietly, "just a man who's tired of running from who he was." That evening, Vincent called Margaret. She answered on the third ring, her voice uncertain. "Vincent, can we talk? In person?" "Yes, of course, where?" "Rosa's Bistro. Tomorrow at 7. I think it's time we had the dinner we were supposed to have." He heard her breath catch. "Are you sure?" "No," he admitted. "But I'm going to try something I'm not very good at. I'm going to try trusting someone." The next evening, Vincent arrived at Rosa's early. He wore the same suit he'd worn for their supposed first date, and he'd brought something with him. A photograph. When Margaret arrived, she looked nervous, beautiful, and genuine. She sat across from him, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. "I don't know how to start," she said finally. "Let me start," Vincent replied. He slid the photograph across the table. It showed a young man, cocky, hard-eyed, someone you wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley. "That's me at 30. That's who I was when my brother Tommy died, and I had to decide what kind of man I wanted to be." Margaret picked up the photo carefully. "What did you decide?" I decided I didn't want to be that person anymore. But it wasn't quick and it wasn't easy. It took losing almost everything, my freedom, years with my son, Maria's trust, before I really changed. He took a breath. You wanted to write about redemption. Let me tell you what redemption actually looks like. It looks like apologizing to people who won't forgive you. It looks like showing up to volunteer at a library even when you feel like a fraud because you haven't touched a book in years. It looks like raising your granddaughter and praying every day that she turns out nothing like you were. Tears rolled down Margaret's face. Vincent, I'll give you the story, he continued. The real one. Not for money, not for fame. But on one condition, I tell it to Sophie first. She deserves to hear it from me, not from a book. And you write it honestly. The ugly parts and the redemption parts. You don't make me a hero or a victim. You just tell the truth. Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. Why would you do this? After I lied to you? Because Elena was right. People change. I changed. Maybe you're changing. Maybe letting the truth out is how we both move forward. He squeezed her hand gently. And because somewhere in all this mess, I think we actually did connect. I think maybe that part was real. It was, Margaret whispered. It is. If you've been moved by this journey, by the possibility of second chances and honest truth, please subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories about real people facing real choices. The waiter came by, and Vincent ordered for both of them. The special, the one he'd originally planned to order on their first date. They talked late into the evening, and for the first time, it felt like the beginning of something genuine. 2 weeks later, Vincent sat in his living room with Sophie. He'd asked her to come over on a Saturday afternoon, told her they needed to talk about something important. She sat curled up on the couch, the same couch where he'd read to her when she was little, where they'd watched movies together, where she'd cried on his shoulder when her father died. "Grandpa, you're scaring me," she said. "Are you sick?" "No, sweetheart. Nothing like that." He took a deep breath. "I need to tell you some things about my past. Things I should have told you years ago." He spent the next 2 hours talking. He told her about the docs, about his brother Tommy, about the choices he'd made that he wasn't proud of. He told her about his trial, his prison time, his testimony against men who'd once been friends. He didn't spare himself or make excuses. When he finished, Sophie was crying, but she hadn't moved away from him. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. So he told her about Margaret, about the book, about deciding that honesty was better than waiting for secrets to surface. "I understand if you're angry," he said. "If you need time to process this, or if you—" Sophie cut him off by wrapping her arms around him. "Grandpa, I'm not angry. I'm sad that you carried this alone for so long, but it doesn't change who you are to me. You're the man who raised me, who helped me with homework and drove me to interviews and believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Whatever you did 40 years ago, you've been making up for it every day since." Vincent held his granddaughter and let himself cry for the second time in a week. "Your grandmother would be proud of how you turned out," he managed to say. "She'd be proud of how you turned out too," Sophie replied. The next few months were difficult. Margaret's book came out, and there was some media attention. A few reporters called. Some old acquaintances from Brooklyn reached out. But the story Margaret told was honest and complicated. She wrote about Vincent's crimes without glorifying them, and about his redemption without making it seem simple or complete. She wrote about the thousands of small decisions that make up a changed life. She also wrote about her own deception, her own complicated feelings, and how investigating Vincent's redemption had forced her to examine her own ethics and choices. Critics called the book unflinchingly honest and a meditation on change, forgiveness, and the possibility of becoming better than you were. Sophie read it cover to cover, and afterward, she told Vincent she understood him better now. More than that, she was proud of him for telling the truth even when it was hard. Vincent and Margaret continued to see each other, slowly rebuilding trust. They took it slower this time. Coffee dates instead of dinners, honest conversations instead of book club small talk. Margaret introduced him to her daughter Emma, whose medical bills the book advance had helped pay. Emma was wary at first, but eventually warmed to Vincent's quiet kindness. One Saturday afternoon, 6 months after that first conversation in the hotel room, Vincent and Margaret sat on a bench in the park where he used to push Sophie on the swings when she was little. "Do you think we'll make it?" Margaret asked. "Us, I mean. With everything that happened." Vincent thought about it. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I think that's okay. We're both learning to do things differently. You're learning to be honest first instead of after, and I'm learning to trust again. Maybe that's enough for now." Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you, you know. I didn't plan to, but I do." "I know," Vincent said. "I think I love you too. Despite everything, or maybe because of it." Elena called him one day, just to check in. She'd heard about the book, seen some of the reviews. "You did good, Vincent," she said. "Facing it all like that. Not everyone would have that courage." "I learned from the best," he replied. "You were brave enough to warn me even after I broke your heart." "That took more courage than anything I did." She laughed. "Maybe we're both just old fools trying to do better. Maybe that's the best any of us can hope for." Sophie's graduation came and went, beautiful and proud. Vincent sat in the audience with Margaret beside him, and when Sophie walked across the stage to receive her nursing diploma, he felt the weight of all his choices, good and bad, leading to this moment. After the ceremony, Sophie found them in the crowd and hugged them both. "Thank you for coming," she said to Margaret, who'd become a cautious friend over the months. "I'm glad you're here." As summer turned to fall, Vincent found himself surprised by happiness. Not the naive happiness of someone who's never made mistakes, but the earned happiness of someone who's faced his past and survived it. He still volunteered at the library. He still played chess at the community center. He still visited Maria's grave and told her about his life. But now he had Margaret to make dinner with, and Sophie called to tell him about her patients, and the future felt less like something to endure and more like something to build. On what would have been his 50th anniversary with Maria, Vincent brought flowers to her grave as always, but this time Margaret came with him. "Is this okay?" she asked, hesitant. "She'd want me to be happy," Vincent said. "And she'd want me to be honest. I think she'd like you." They stood together in the autumn sunshine. 3 people bound by truth, mistakes, and the possibility of grace. Vincent thought about the young man in that photograph. Angry, afraid, making terrible choices. That man was still part of him, but he wasn't all of him anymore. Redemption wasn't erasing the past. It was carrying it forward and choosing every day to be someone better. If this story touched your heart, please remember to like this video. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on second chances and redemption. And subscribe for more heartwarming, true-to-life stories. We're so grateful you joined us on Vincent's journey. Remember, it's never too late to change, to forgive, or to build something genuine from the ashes of who you used to be. Thank you for watching, and may you find your own path to peace.